The bakery went silent the second the Mafia boss walked through the door. Customers stopped talking. Employees froze in place. Even the sound of the coffee machines seemed to disappear. Everyone in the city knew who he was. A man powerful enough to ruin businesses with a single phone call. A man nobody dared challenge. Nobody except the plus-size woman standing behind the counter. When one of his bodyguards demanded that she close the bakery for a private meeting, she refused. When the Mafia boss himself stepped forward and tried to intimidate her, she refused again. The tension became unbearable. Then, without raising her voice, she picked up a long cake knife, placed the tip against his throat, and said something that made the entire room stop breathing. Power only works on people who are afraid. Nobody expected what happened next, especially not the Mafia boss. For a few seconds, nobody moved. The tip of the cake knife rested lightly against the Mafia boss's throat. Not enough to hurt him, just enough to make a point. The entire bakery stood frozen. A little girl near the window clutched her mother's arm. An employee in the kitchen doorway stared with wide eyes. One customer quietly reached for his phone, already sensing that whatever happened next would become a story people talked about for years. The 3 bodyguards reacted first. Their hands moved toward their jackets. Not fast, not recklessly, but everyone knew what they were reaching for. The atmosphere instantly became dangerous. One wrong move, one misunderstanding, and the peaceful bakery could become a crime scene. "Emma," whispered one of her employees. His voice trembled. "Please, don't do this." But Emma Hartley never took her eyes off the man standing in front of her. The Mafia boss looked down briefly at the knife, then back at her. His expression remained unreadable, which somehow made him even more intimidating. Most people expected him to explode with rage. Most people expected violence. Instead, he simply asked, "Are you threatening me?" Emma's grip on the handle remained steady. "No." The answer surprised everyone, even him. "No?" he repeated. "I'm protecting my business." The room fell silent again. Emma slowly gestured toward the crowded bakery. "The people eating breakfast here matter." She pointed toward the elderly couple sitting near the front window, then toward a mother with 2 children, then toward the workers who depended on her. "This bakery feeds families." Her voice remained calm. "And nobody walks in here and decides those people don't matter." Something shifted in the room. The customers who had been terrified moments earlier suddenly found themselves looking at her differently. Not as a reckless woman, but as someone defending something she had spent years building. One of the bodyguards stepped forward. "Boss, just give the order." The threat hung in the air. Emma heard it. Everyone did. But the Mafia boss raised one hand. Immediately, the bodyguard stopped. The room grew even quieter. The Mafia boss studied her face carefully. He noticed the flour on her apron, the tiredness beneath her eyes, the tiny burn scar near her wrist from years of working ovens. Nothing about her looked powerful. Nothing about her looked dangerous. Yet she was the only person in the building who wasn't afraid of him. That fact seemed to interest him more than the knife itself. Finally, he asked a question nobody expected. "What's your name?" Several customers exchanged confused looks. Emma blinked. "Emma Hartley." The Mafia boss nodded slowly, as if committing the name to memory. Then, to everyone's shock, he took a small step backward. The knife left his throat. The tension eased slightly, but nobody relaxed completely. Not yet, because nobody understood what was happening. The Mafia boss glanced around the bakery one final time, then looked back at Emma. Most people expected a threat, a warning, a promise of revenge. Instead, he gave a faint smile, a smile so subtle that many wondered if they had imagined it. "Interesting," he said. Then he turned toward the door. The bodyguards looked confused. The customers looked confused. Even Emma felt a flicker of uncertainty. Without another word, the Mafia boss walked out of the bakery. His men followed. The door closed behind them, And only then did everyone finally breathe again. But as Emma watched his black car disappear down the street, a strange feeling settled in her chest. Because somehow, she was no longer certain that their story had ended. She had the unsettling feeling that it had only just begun. By the next morning, the entire city had heard about what happened. Not because Emma had told anyone, because someone in the bakery had uploaded a video. The footage was shaky. The audio was imperfect. But one moment was crystal clear. The moment a plus-size bakery owner pressed a cake knife against the throat of the most feared man in the city. Within hours, the clip spread everywhere. Social media pages reposted it. Local news stations discussed it. Radio hosts debated whether Emma was brave or reckless. Some called her courageous. Many called her foolish. Almost everyone agreed on one thing. She had just made the biggest mistake of her life. At first, Emma tried to ignore it. She focused on baking, decorating cakes, serving customers, pretending everything was normal. But by the end of the week, she could no longer deny reality. The bakery was becoming empty. People who used to visit every morning suddenly stopped coming. Regular customers crossed the street instead of entering. Several standing orders were cancelled without explanation. One afternoon, Emma watched through the window as a family approached the bakery. The parents looked at the sign, whispered to each other, then turned around and left, without even opening the door. The sight hurt more than she expected. Not because of the lost sale, because she had spent 7 years earning people's trust. And now fear was destroying it in days. The financial impact appeared quickly. Sales dropped nearly 40%. Then 50. Bills continued arriving, but customers continued disappearing. Her employees noticed the change too. One evening after closing, Sarah, a young cashier who had worked for Emma for 3 years, approached her carefully. "People are scared," Sarah admitted. "They think the Mafia Boss is waiting to punish anyone who supports the bakery." Emma forced a smile. "I'm sure things will settle down." But even she didn't believe her own words. The problems didn't stop there. A few days later, Emma's older brother called. The conversation lasted less than 10 minutes. Yet every word stayed with her. "What were you thinking?" he demanded. "Do you realize who that man is?" "I wasn't going to let him push me around." "You should have." His answer came immediately. "Sometimes survival matters more than pride." Emma stared silently at the kitchen wall. For the first time, doubt began creeping into her mind. Had she gone too far? Had she risked everything she built for one moment of defiance? Then came the final blow. A certified letter arrived from the building owner. Emma opened it while standing behind the counter. Her stomach tightened as she read. The landlord wanted to discuss terminating her lease agreement. Officially, he cited concerns about negative publicity and declining business activity. Unofficially, everyone knew the truth. He was afraid of being associated with her, afraid of attracting attention from powerful people, afraid of becoming collateral damage. That night, Emma sat alone in the dark bakery. The display cases were empty. The chairs stood silent. For years, this place had been her sanctuary. Her dream, her proof that hard work could overcome anything. Now it felt as though the walls themselves were beginning to crumble around her, and she couldn't shake one terrifying thought. What if the people warning her had been right? What if standing up to the Mafia Boss wasn't the moment that saved her dignity, but the moment that destroyed everything she had ever built? Emma barely slept that night. Long after the bakery lights were turned off, she sat alone in the kitchen, surrounded by cooling racks and unfinished orders. The silence gave her too much time to think, too much time to remember, because this wasn't the first time people had looked at her and decided she wasn't good enough. She had been hearing that message her entire life. As a child, Emma was always bigger than the other girls. Classmates made jokes. Strangers offered unwanted advice. Even adults sometimes spoke as if her weight defined her entire future. By the time she reached high school, she had learned an important lesson. People often judged her before learning a single thing about her. Some assumed she was lazy. Others assumed she lacked confidence. Few bothered discovering who she truly was. The words hurt, but over time, they also hardened something inside her. While others spent weekends at parties, Emma worked. While others chased popularity, she learned baking. Her grandmother had owned a small bakery decades earlier. Emma spent countless afternoons beside her, learning recipes that had been passed through generations. The smell of fresh bread became her comfort. The kitchen became the one place where nobody cared how she looked, only how well she worked. Years later, after her grandmother passed away, Emma made herself a promise. One day she would open a bakery of her own. Not because it was easy, because it mattered. The dream nearly died before it even started. Banks rejected her loan applications. Investors showed no interest. One loan officer looked at her business plan for less than 3 minutes before dismissing it entirely. Yet Emma refused to quit. She worked 2 jobs, saved every dollar she could, took classes at night, and after years of sacrifice, she finally opened Hartley's Bakery. The first months were brutal. Some days, she barely made enough money to cover expenses. But she kept going, one customer at a time, one cake at a time, one impossible day at a time. Then there was Daniel. For a moment, she thought life was finally changing. Daniel had been charming, attentive, supportive, at least in the beginning. They became engaged after 2 years together. Emma genuinely believed she had found someone who loved her for who she was. Then, reality arrived. 6 months before the wedding, Daniel ended everything. Not during an argument, not because of betrayal, but because he was embarrassed. A mutual friend later revealed the truth. Daniel worried about what people thought when they saw them together. He wanted someone more attractive, someone who fit the image he imagined for himself. The humiliation nearly destroyed her. For weeks, Emma could barely leave her apartment. She cried when nobody was watching, questioned her worth, questioned everything. But eventually, she got up, returned to work, and poured every ounce of pain into building her business. That experience changed her forever. It taught her that respect could never come from other people. It had to come from within. That was why she had stood her ground against the Mafia Boss. Not because she was fearless, not because she thought she was invincible, but because she had spent years fighting battles nobody else could see. And after surviving all of them, the idea of surrendering to intimidation felt worse than failure itself. Yet as Emma locked the bakery and stepped into the cold night air, she had no idea that somewhere across the city, another person was quietly learning her story. A man who should have hated her. A man who should have been planning revenge. Instead, the Mafia Boss had become interested. Across the city, in the top floor of a private office overlooking the skyline, Vincent Moretti sat alone. The man most people knew as the Mafia Boss rarely thought about strangers. People either feared him, obeyed him, or avoided him. Very few ever became memorable. Yet 3 days after leaving the bakery, he still found himself thinking about Emma Hartley. Not the knife, not the confrontation. Her eyes. There had been no panic in them, no attempt to impress him, no calculation, only conviction. And that bothered him, because courage was easy to fake when people believed they had something to gain. But Emma had gained nothing. In fact, she had lost almost everything. Vincent stood beside the window and looked down at the city. "Tell me about her." The request was directed toward his longtime advisor, Marco. Marco looked surprised. "You want a report?" "I want the truth." Within 48 hours, a thick folder landed on Vincent's desk. At first, he expected something ordinary. A background check, financial records, business information. Instead, he found himself reading for hours. The deeper he looked, the more unusual the story became. No wealthy investors, no powerful connections, no secret benefactors. Emma Hartley had built everything herself. Every loan, every payment, every expansion, every success. Vincent studied the photos attached to the report. One showed her carrying sacks of flour into the bakery before sunrise. Another showed her repairing equipment herself, rather than paying contractors she couldn't afford. There were years of sacrifices hidden behind every image. Then he reached the section about her personal life. His expression darkened. The report detailed the broken engagement, the humiliation, the depression that followed. The months she spent rebuilding herself afterward. Marco watched silently. Most people never saw Vincent display emotion, yet he noticed something unusual. The boss wasn't reading like a predator searching for weakness. He was reading like a man trying to understand someone. "She survived all that?" Vincent asked quietly. Marco nodded. Without help, Vincent leaned back in his chair. Most people assumed strength came from power, money, influence, fear. That was how the world usually worked. But Emma possessed a different kind of strength, the kind that could not be bought, the kind forged through years of disappointment, the kind that remained standing after life knocked it down again and again. For the first time, Vincent understood why she had not feared him. It wasn't because she underestimated him. It was because she had already fought battles far more personal than anything he could threaten her with. That realization stayed with him. Days passed. Then, another piece of information arrived. Hartley's bakery was struggling. Revenue was collapsing. Customers were disappearing. The landlord was considering ending her lease. Vincent stared at the numbers for several moments. He knew exactly why it was happening. His reputation. People weren't avoiding her because of what she had done. They were avoiding her because of who she had challenged. For reasons he couldn't fully explain, the realization left a bitter taste in his mouth. Meanwhile, Emma believed she was fighting this battle alone. She had no idea that one of the most powerful men in the city was now following every development, watching, observing, trying to understand why her story felt strangely familiar. But what Vincent didn't know yet was that Emma's troubles were about to become much bigger than a viral video, because someone else had noticed her bakery. Someone far more dangerous than public opinion. And, unlike Vincent, this man genuinely wanted to destroy everything she had built. The first offer arrived on a Tuesday morning. Emma almost threw it away without reading it. At first glance, it looked like another advertisement, a professionally printed envelope, a corporate logo, a formal letter. Inside was an offer to purchase Hartley's bakery. The amount was far higher than the building's actual market value. For a brief moment, Emma simply stared at the number. Most small business owners would have considered it a dream opportunity. But something felt wrong. The bakery wasn't for sale. It had never been for sale, and nobody had ever approached her before. She declined the offer immediately. 3 days later, a second offer arrived. This one was even larger. Along with a warning, the company planned to redevelop the entire neighborhood. Businesses that cooperated would be compensated generously. Businesses that resisted might face difficulties. Emma felt a knot form in her stomach. The message was polite, but the threat hiding underneath was obvious. She rejected the offer again. That was when the real pressure began. Within weeks, construction notices appeared throughout the district. Property owners started selling. Several neighboring businesses closed. One by one, familiar storefronts disappeared. Soon, only a handful remained. Hartley's bakery was one of them. Then strange things started happening. A large catering contract was cancelled at the last minute. A supplier unexpectedly raised prices. A bank suddenly delayed renewing a credit line she had used for years. Each problem seemed unrelated, yet together they formed a pattern. Someone was tightening a noose around her business. Emma knew it. She simply couldn't prove it. The stress became overwhelming. Every night she reviewed spreadsheets until midnight. Every morning she woke before dawn wondering if she could survive another month. The bakery that once felt like her greatest achievement now felt like a battlefield. One rainy afternoon, Sarah entered the office carrying a stack of unpaid invoices. Her face looked pale. Emma already knew. How bad? Sarah hesitated. If things continue like this, we might have to start letting people go. The words hit harder than any insult ever could. These weren't employees to her. They were family. People who had believed in the bakery when nobody else had. People who trusted her. And now she might fail them. That evening, Emma sat alone in the dining area after closing. The empty chairs seemed to mock her. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows. For the first time in years, she wondered whether everyone else had been right. Maybe dreams weren't enough. Maybe hard work wasn't enough. Maybe people like her were never meant to win against people with money, influence, and power. Then her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost ignored it. Almost. Hello? A calm male voice answered. Miss Hartley, my name is Richard Keller. Emma immediately recognized the name. Keller Development Group. The corporation trying to buy the neighborhood. Her expression hardened. What do you want? I'd like to meet. I'm not interested. You should be. His voice remained pleasant. Too pleasant. Because underneath it, she could hear confidence. The confidence of a man accustomed to getting whatever he wanted. You still believe this is about real estate, Keller said. But it isn't. Emma felt her pulse quicken. What does that mean? There was a brief silence. Then he spoke words that sent a chill through her entire body. It means your bakery is standing on land that belongs to my future. The line went dead. Emma remained frozen, staring at the phone. For the first time since all of this began, she felt genuine fear. Not fear for herself, fear that someone far more powerful than she realized had decided to make an example of her. And across the city, when news of Keller's latest move finally reached Vincent Moretti's desk, the Mafia Boss's expression became colder than anyone in the room had seen in years. Vincent Moretti had dealt with men like Richard Keller before. They wore expensive suits, spoke with polished confidence, donated to charities, appeared on magazine covers, and convinced the world they were respectable. But Vincent knew something most people didn't. The most dangerous predators rarely looked dangerous. They looked successful. 3 days after Keller contacted Emma, a detailed report landed on Vincent's desk. At first, he only intended to review the real estate project, nothing more. But one name buried inside the documents immediately caught his attention. Hartley, the same surname as Emma. Vincent continued reading. His expression slowly darkened. 20 years earlier, Emma's father had owned a small manufacturing company. Nothing large, nothing powerful, just a family business built through decades of hard work. Then, Keller entered the picture. Back then, he wasn't a billionaire developer. He was an ambitious investor looking for rapid growth. Court records revealed a series of aggressive acquisitions, predatory contracts, questionable partnerships. Businesses pushed into impossible financial situations before being absorbed at a fraction of their value. One of those businesses had belonged to Emma's father. Vincent opened another file, then another. The pattern became impossible to ignore. The Hartley family had lost everything. Their company collapsed. Their savings disappeared. The stress nearly destroyed Emma's father. According to medical records, he suffered a fatal heart attack less than a year later. Officially, nobody blamed Keller. Legally, he had done nothing wrong. But Vincent had spent his entire life reading between the lines. He knew exactly what had happened. The realization settled heavily in the room. Emma wasn't simply fighting for a bakery. She was defending the last piece of her family's legacy, the last thing carrying their name, the last proof that everything her father built hadn't vanished forever. For several moments, Vincent sat silently. Then he looked at a photograph clipped inside the report. Emma stood outside the bakery during its grand opening years earlier. The sign above the entrance read, Hartley's Bakery. The same family name. The same name Keller had nearly erased decades ago. Suddenly, everything made sense. Why she refused to sell. Why she endured financial pressure. Why she fought so fiercely despite impossible odds. This wasn't stubbornness. This was survival. For the first time, Vincent felt something unfamiliar. Not curiosity, not admiration, respect, deep respect. Because while powerful men like Keller built empires by taking things from others, Emma had spent her entire life rebuilding what others had taken from her. Alone, without protection, without influence, without anyone standing beside her. Marco entered the office later that evening. The pressure campaign is escalating, he reported. Keller believes she'll break within weeks. Vincent remained silent. His gaze never left the photograph. Marco studied him carefully. You want me to continue monitoring the situation? For several seconds, Vincent didn't answer. Then he finally spoke. How many people know about Keller's connection to her family? Very few. Vincent nodded slowly. A cold expression settled across his face, the same expression that usually appeared before major decisions. Interesting. Marco recognized the look immediately. Someone was about to become a problem. The only question was, who? Meanwhile, across town, Emma sat inside her nearly empty bakery, reviewing another stack of overdue bills. She believed she was running out of options. She believed she was fighting alone. She had no idea that two powerful men were now focused on her future. One wanted to erase everything she had built. The other had just decided he wasn't going to let that happen, and very soon, their collision would become impossible to avoid. The public hearing was held 2 weeks later. By then, nearly everyone in the city knew about the conflict. Residents filled the auditorium. Local reporters lined the walls. Television cameras waited near the front rows. The proposed redevelopment project had become one of the city's biggest stories, and at the center of it all sat Emma Hartley, alone. As she looked around the crowded room, she immediately noticed something. Richard Keller wasn't worried. He walked into the meeting smiling, confident, relaxed, like a man who already knew the outcome. When the presentations began, Keller spoke first. He described luxury apartments, new businesses, economic growth, jobs, opportunity. The audience applauded several times. Everything sounded perfect. Then Emma was invited to speak. She stood slowly. Her hands trembled slightly. Not from fear, from exhaustion. Weeks of stress had taken their toll. Still, she stepped toward the microphone. She spoke about small businesses, community, families, history. She explained what the bakery meant to her, what it meant to the neighborhood. For a few moments, the room listened quietly. Then Keller stood again. The smile on his face immediately made Emma uneasy. Miss Hartley tells an emotional story, he said. A few people nodded. But cities cannot be built on emotions. The room grew quieter. Keller continued. Progress requires difficult decisions. His eyes shifted toward Emma. And unfortunately, some people struggle to accept when their time has passed. Several reporters immediately began writing notes. Emma felt heat rising in her face. But Keller wasn't finished. In truth, he said smoothly, this entire debate is really about one struggling bakery owned by someone unwilling to face reality. A few uncomfortable laughs echoed through the room. Emma's stomach tightened. Then came the final blow. Keller looked directly at her. Perhaps if Miss Hartley spent less time fighting inevitable change and more time improving her situation, we wouldn't be having this discussion. The insult was carefully disguised. But everyone understood exactly what he meant. Her appearance, her status, her lack of wealth. For a brief moment, the room became painfully silent. Emma lowered her eyes. Not because she agreed, because she was tired. Tired of being judged, tired of defending herself, tired of proving her worth. And that was when another voice suddenly broke the silence. "That's enough." The entire room turned. Every conversation stopped. Every camera shifted. Richard Keller's confident smile disappeared instantly. Because the man standing near the back of the auditorium was Vincent Moretti, the Mafia Boss. A wave of shock moved through the audience. Nobody had expected him to appear, least of all Emma. Vincent walked forward slowly. His expression was calm, but there was something dangerous beneath the surface, something everyone in the room could feel. He stopped beside Emma, not behind her, not in front of her, beside her. The gesture alone spoke volumes. Then he looked directly at Keller. "You talk about progress," Vincent said quietly. "But all I've heard today is a wealthy man mocking someone who built something with her own hands." Nobody moved. Nobody interrupted. Even Keller seemed unsure how to respond. Vincent's gaze never left him. "Miss Hartley has contributed more to this community through one bakery than some people contribute through an entire empire." The audience erupted into whispers. Emma stared at him in disbelief. This was the last person she expected to defend her. Yet here he was, publicly, without hesitation, without asking for anything in return. For the first time since this nightmare began, Emma felt something she hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. But neither she nor Keller realized that Vincent's appearance wasn't the biggest surprise waiting in that room, because hidden inside a sealed investigative file was information capable of destroying Richard Keller's reputation forever. And that file was already on its way. The collapse of Richard Keller's reputation began less than 48 hours after the public hearing. At first, it was only a rumor, a leaked document, a suspicious financial record, a question raised by a local journalist. Then another reporter found something, and another. Soon, the story exploded. News outlets across the city began publishing investigations into Keller Development Group, hidden payments, questionable land acquisitions, manipulated contracts. Several former employees came forward with allegations. Former business owners shared stories that sounded disturbingly familiar. The image Keller had spent decades building began to crack. Then it shattered. One television interview changed everything. An investigative reporter revealed documents connecting Keller to a series of predatory business practices dating back more than 20 years. Among the victims was the Hartley family. For the first time, the public learned what Emma had never spoken about: how her father's company had collapsed, how her family had lost nearly everything, how she had spent years rebuilding a life from the ruins left behind. The city reacted immediately. People who had once dismissed her as stubborn suddenly saw the truth. Emma wasn't standing in the way of progress. She was standing up against the same man who had been taking advantage of ordinary families for years. The story spread far beyond local media. Social media users shared old photos of Hartley's bakery. Former customers posted memories. Parents shared pictures of birthday cakes Emma had made for their children. The bakery became more than a business. It became a symbol of perseverance, of resilience, of refusing to surrender. 3 days later, Emma arrived at work before sunrise. As she turned the corner, she stopped walking. For a moment, she thought she was imagining things. A line of customers stretched down the sidewalk. Dozens of people waited outside. Some carried flowers. Others carried handwritten notes. Many simply wanted to buy a loaf of bread. When the doors opened, the first customer stepped inside and smiled. "We're here because we believe in you." Emma felt her throat tighten. For weeks, she had been fighting alone. Now, she wasn't alone anymore. Throughout the day, the bakery remained packed. Orders poured in faster than the staff could process them. Reporters requested interviews. Community groups offered support. Even neighboring businesses began promoting Hartley's bakery online. For the first time since the nightmare began, hope felt real. But While the city celebrated Emma's victory, one final chapter remained unfinished. Because public support could restore her reputation, it could restore her business, but it could not erase the people who had abandoned her when she needed them most. And one of those people was about to walk back into her life. The turnaround was almost unbelievable. Just a month earlier, people had avoided Hartley's bakery. Now the line outside stretched around the block before opening every morning. Customers traveled from neighboring towns just to meet Emma. Many brought flowers. Others brought letters. Some simply wanted to shake her hand. The same community that once doubted her was now celebrating her. Then came the apologies. The landlord, who had considered terminating her lease, arrived one afternoon carrying a box of pastries from another shop. He looked embarrassed. "I was wrong," he admitted. "I let fear make decisions for me." Emma accepted the apology politely. But something had changed inside her. She no longer needed other people's approval to feel secure. The biggest surprise came a week later. Emma was arranging cupcakes near the display case when the front door opened. Her hands froze. Daniel, her former fiancé, the man who had walked away years ago, the man who had made her feel as though she wasn't enough. He looked nervous, almost uncomfortable. For several moments, neither of them spoke. Finally, Daniel smiled awkwardly. "You look amazing." Emma said nothing. "I made a mistake," he continued. "A huge mistake." The words she had once dreamed of hearing now felt strangely empty. Daniel glanced around the crowded bakery, the successful business, the happy customers, the life she had built without him. "I was hoping we could talk," he said. "Maybe start over." Emma studied him quietly. Years ago, his rejection would have broken her heart all over again. Now she felt something entirely different. Peace. A small smile appeared on her face. Not cruel, not angry, simply certain. "You didn't leave because I wasn't enough," she said softly. "You left because you couldn't see my value." Daniel lowered his eyes. "And that's not my problem anymore." For the first time in her life, Emma didn't feel like someone waiting to be chosen. She felt like someone who had finally chosen herself. As Daniel walked away, another figure appeared outside the bakery window. A man in a dark suit, watching quietly. Vincent Moretti. And when their eyes met across the crowded street, Emma suddenly realized that the most important person in her future was not someone returning from her past. It was someone who had been standing beside her all along. 6 months later, Hartley's bakery was thriving. Not just surviving, thriving. The small shop that had once stood on the edge of collapse had become one of the most beloved businesses in the city. New customers arrived every day. Additional locations were already being planned. And for the first time in years, Emma could look toward the future without fear. One evening, after closing, she stood alone in the bakery. The familiar scent of fresh bread filled the air. The same scent that had carried her through every setback, every heartbreak, and every impossible challenge. The front door opened. Vincent stepped inside. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Emma smiled. "I never thanked you." Vincent shook his head. "You don't owe me thanks." Emma laughed softly. "Then tell me something." He raised an eyebrow. "What?" She looked directly into his eyes. "Why did you help me?" For a moment, the powerful man who intimidated entire cities seemed unusually thoughtful. Then he answered. "It wasn't the knife." Emma blinked. "What?" "The day we met." A small smile appeared on his face. "Everyone remembers the knife." He stepped closer. "But that's not what I remember." Emma remained silent. Vincent's voice softened. "I remember a woman willing to risk everything to protect what she built. A woman who refused to surrender. A woman who stood alone when everyone expected her to be afraid." For several seconds, neither looked away, because both understood the truth. Respect had become admiration, Admiration had become something deeper. Outside, the city continued moving. Inside, Hartley's bakery stood exactly where it always had. Only now, it was no longer a symbol of survival. It was a symbol of victory. And as Emma looked around the bakery carrying her family name, she realized something beautiful. The people who once underestimated her no longer mattered, because she had built a life no one could take away. And this time, she wasn't standing alone.